You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series and syndicating for the A-List Online. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith, and before I go any further, I want to wish all of my listeners a very Merry Christmas and all the best through 2019. I've got an extraordinary interview subject for you coming up. His name is Michael Beinhorn. And Michael, if you're listening, I really hope I pronounced your surname correctly there, so if I haven't, my apologies. Michael is a very gifted producer. He's worked with, these are just a few of the bands that he's worked with, and I do talk a little bit about this through the conversation. Soundgarden, Hole, Korn, Marilyn Manson, Social Distortion, Ozzy Osbourne, the Golden Palominos, Herbie Hancock, and Soul Asylum. I didn't want to punish Michael too much through the conversation. As you can imagine, my interest in a lot of these bands is deep, and the conversation could easily have gone on for a couple of hours. But what you've got here is 40 minutes or so of Michael talking about a selection of bands here that he's produced, but also to discuss, and this is the reason for the conversation I might add, what he's doing these days. It turns out he's got a whole suite of solutions and services available to the working musician. So without further delay, here he is, Michael Beinhorn, the producer. First things first, mate, Merry Christmas, and I hope all things go really well for you through 2019.
Well, thank you, and the very same to you.
How's, when you reflect on 2018, what are your thoughts?
That's a very general question. It's funny because, like, a lot of stuff has happened that is obviously indirectly and directly affecting everyone in a lot of the same ways. For me personally, obviously, it's kind of different. It's definitely been a very turbulent year.
Yeah.
It's not always in the best possible way.
Yep.
But apart from political stuff, it's actually been really exciting.
Yep.
It's been one of my best years ever, in so many ways.
Wow, that's really saying something too. Yeah, with all of the wonderful people you've worked with and the resume you've got.
Incredible. It's incredible. It's been a very inspiring year, and I've been able to do a lot of things that I really have been. I've been kind of talking and planning about for a long time, and on top of everything else, I've got a baby son, so that enhanced everything immensely. So yeah, it's been for me personally, it's been an extraordinary year, and in general, I'd say.
But and look, there are so many episodes throughout your career that I'd love to have a chat to you about, because I am a teenager from the 90s. So it was inevitable that if you were a teenager through the 90s, you stumbled across your name in liner notes and got to know you through so many of the wonderful albums that you had so much to do with through engineering or production or whatever it might have been. But I tell you, the opportunity for our chat is because these days, and I think there's 6 or 7 different items here that were sent across in your bio. Okay, so you've got pre-production. These are services you're offering these days. Pre-production.
Yeah.
One that I hadn't quite heard of before, to be quite honest, which was pre-production. You've got you've got song analysis. You've got recording production, pre-recording project analysis, which I think is just brilliant, and artist development. Now, in this day and age of virtually no A&R, of cynically manufactured pop stars, I guess they've always been around, but they're just so bloody prevalent these days. you know, the death of the rock and roll and the rock and roll star, as far as the mainstream media is concerned, and of course the end of record companies as we knew them for at least the previous 50 years. I think all of the services that you're now offering are essential for any serious collective of musicians, really, no matter what stage they are in their career. So, mate, what's inspired you to make yourself so available to the working musician through so many wonderful applications?
I just saw that no one else was doing it. I mean, I think innovation comes from seeing an opening and deciding to fill the space. Like I'm not saying that these types of services are particularly lucrative. I mean, I would actually go so far as to say they're probably anything but.
Yes, I imagine. Yeah.
It's not the kind of thing that can make anyone, certainly not me, a whole lot of money, but I couldn't care less about that. Like, I'm just listening to the types of recordings that people are doing right now. And I just feel that they lack so much in terms of spirit, in terms of ingenuity, in terms of expression, in terms of, just the way you used to be able to listen to music and get excited by it. Like, I see people being turned on by music in a way, but I don't see anyone getting excited about it in the way that I know I used to, and actually was able to do up till, I guess like 20, 25 years ago. Things started to kind of like taper off drastically. And like, I feel that the public are being cheated in a lot of ways. I feel like they're not being given the full experience of what music is, and it's become something that can be employed as wallpaper, rather than something that absolutely rivets you and takes you on a journey and will not relinquish its hold over you for anything. That's what music is supposed to be. It can't be wallpaper all the time. I mean, there's nothing wrong with some music being wallpaper. It should be. There's room for all of it, though. And we don't have that right now. And, you talk about rock music dying. Any issues with rock music's mortality at all pertains to how it's being created right now. That people treat it as something people have really mistakenly applied this very punk rock ethic to rock music creation now, where it's kind of like just write the song, get it recorded, boom, the end, because rock music isn't something that needs a whole lot of thought. And that's just pure idiocy. I think you can really employ that kind of aesthetic to rock music creation if you are really making music that relies on that degree and level of spontaneity, or B, if you're actually technically capable of being able to pull something off that's that compelling and requires that little thought. Otherwise, you're in the same boat with everyone else, and you have to really consider what you're doing very carefully before you do it, instead of making half-cocked or semi-artistic statements in the world. And that's what we're dealing with right now. People who aren't really putting their best foot forward before they act. And that's really a lot of the basis for why I've decided to do this. And I've decided to make it available to everybody. I mean, there are artists I'm working with now who are actually really established. But what surprises me about that is that I'm working with artists who've had, careers for like, I guess the better part of 25 years, and no one in that time period has actually taken the time to analyze their music. They just figured, if this guy can write like a hit single every record he does, or maybe two, I don't give a shit what the rest of his record sounds like. You know what I mean? Like,
I do, yeah.
But the thing is that you are depriving these incredibly talented people of so much. When you give them the ability to have insight into their own work so that they can actually take a step back and go, oh, wow, this could be so much better. Like, you've essentially given them the opportunity to be much more creative than they would be on their own without any kind of objective input. This is really important stuff we're talking about. It's essential. Everything about this is at least important as the act of physically recording a record.
Well, yeah, and what you're saying is absolutely reflected in the quality of a lot of the material that we're hearing. So I get a lot of albums sent to me. The majority of them are usually pretty good, but there are a few where it's like, holy moly, they needed to get in touch with a Michael Beinhorn, in order to better understand. Okay. You talk about, this is one question for you here. So pre-production, of course, I'm a musician, okay, so I'll volunteer that now. So I understand the idea of pre-production. Sure. But pre-production, is that something, well, tell us all about that. That's the best way to start that.
Well, that really pertains to being able to, I guess, work on the record via correspondence. To tell you the truth, I've kind of rolled the two into one another since that all got prepared, because everything that I'm doing at this point is via correspondence. You know, that really came about because I was starting records that I was producing with a lot of preparatory work that wasn't necessarily, I didn't necessarily associate it with pre-production. I kind of considered the pre-production phase more of like a combination of sitting with the artist face to face and being in rehearsal. Now for me it's kind of rolled into like one thing, and actually the rehearsal aspect of it has kind of taken a back seat because most artists don't have the kind of money to be able to afford to bring me out to where they are, and for me to sit in a rehearsal room with them for a couple of days to like a few weeks, that's obviously going to be pricey on every level, plus putting me in a plane, stuff like that. So I'm looking at this from the perspective of what's cost effective for musicians, for artists as well right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because in a day and age where recording consoles or DAWs are available pretty much for nothing if people want to pirate them, and they're recording these things in their own bedrooms, and then I think you expressed a point really well there where they're just putting stuff out there without any of this pre-production, song analysis or what have you, and they're just hoping it sticks because, hey, they can write one song, and if they can write one song, well, then that's a wonderful thing, because guess what? Nobody else is listening to the rest of the album. They'll just hear this one song on a Spotify playlist, and the album, well, that'll be out there for the poor saps that just happen to like still buying albums, which there are a lot of rock fans that fall into that category.
Well, and this is an insult to them. It's an insult to the public to make records like this. I mean, there's people now who make records, by and large, are laboring under this mistaken notion that the album is essentially a teaser for the live show, which is the complete polar opposite of what records used to be. But it really kind of illustrates the value or lack thereof that the album really kind of, engenders in this day and age. That it's subpar in importance to the live performance, which is nonsense. Why one should be lesser than the other is beyond me. But really, it's become a matter of economics. So this is why people rush records, why they don't put any thought into making records. The last record I produced, which was quite frankly quite a while ago, and one of the reasons that I decided I couldn't really do that type of work as much anymore was with an artist who was on like this blistering tour schedule, and they'd eked out like a certain amount of time to record their record. And they were sort of like writing songs while they were on the road, not taking a whole lot of time to be able to, I mean, you've seen that movie before, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is when it comes time to cut the record, you can't really judge the quality of the music, whether this is going to be received well, and all of a sudden, whether you're thinking about it or not. And if you're the artist, you really aren't thinking about it at all because you've been on this breakneck touring schedule. You could be looking down the barrel of ending your own career. And I've seen that happen a bunch of times, where people have been in that position and really trying to make a record with this artist and helping them along and trying to get them to see what they were in the process of doing to themselves was a lot of work. And I was like, I can't participate in this anymore. It's not right. The architecture of how this is done needs to be completely different for the sake of the artists, because these are very talented individuals. They should have enough time and enough breathing room to kind of create the sort of record that they want to make. Not just that they need to make, based on how that works into their touring schedule, because then they're thinking about what's benefiting management, record companies, all these interests that are separate from their own. This stuff isn't as important all of a sudden. The actual record, which is the only document that's left over when all is said and done, when the tours are done, when the guys get old, they don't want to do it anymore. The document is still existing. It's the record that you didn't quite get the statement that you wanted to make. You didn't quite hit the peak that you could have hit if only you'd spent a little bit more time. But people are are so obsessed with like the present moment and also with the future, about like the immediate future, the touring schedule. How is this going to fit into my touring schedule? You know, instead of like, no, this record is going to outlast me. This record will be here after I'm gone. You know, what do I want it to say? How do I want it to represent me? You know, if you don't think in those terms, you're in danger of making a record that's going to be mediocre.
And there are two genres that come to mind straight away, of which I interview quite a lot of the leading lights across the globe within, and that's metalcore and deathcore. So they're relatively newish genres that have emerged in the last 15 years or so. So they've got a plethora of wonderful ideas. Check that they've got that. Can the guys and girls in those bands play? My God, can they play? They're probably some of the most accomplished musicians that I've heard ever. Okay,
Lord.
Some of these are like they're in cross between Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai, sort of playing this sort of stuff, but they're playing very heavy stuff. It's like Morbid Angel style tuning, so low C, that sort of thing. But they really need somebody like you, a lot of these kids, to come across and go, hang on a sec, guys, let's craft an album, because so much of the music sounds exactly the same from band, not even just across an album, but from band to band, because they're using similar techniques and they don't have a lot of critical analysis through the production. So my question for you would be, with regards to deathcore, metalcore, and some of the heaviest styles, have you heard any of it? And do you agree with some of my statements there about what these kids are doing and how you could improve, how your involvement could definitely improve their end result?
Stylistically, I'm pretty sure I have. Actually, I was in Copenhagen, like, was it 3 years ago or something? And I was working with some artists and standing outside of a room. I happened to be in this building with a bunch of rehearsal halls. And I found myself standing outside of this one room, listening to people play in a way and to an extent that I had never in my life heard before. The precision of it was beyond anything I could possibly imagine. And I realized that these are people who've come up listening to recordings that have been so heavily edited in Pro Tools and quantized that they're starting that they actually play like this with absolutely no feel, but so incredibly fast and so precise that they literally sound like machinery.
Yeah.
And it was, I have to say, it was absolutely stunning. I mean, my mouth was on the ground. It was my jaw, not my mouth.
We know what you meant.
Yeah, no. I didn't bring a toothbrush. It was absolutely staggering, and I also realized that it was something I would never purchase. I would never want to buy. I think I would want to listen to it at home just to marvel over the performing.
Yeah.
But as far as the compositional stuff, there was nothing to it. It was basically for the sake of the capability that the individuals had, that they had this ability to be able to play like this. That's all it was. And as far as being able to make music, I think it's that genre probably suffers from some of the same issues that certain forms of like techno and dance music suffer from, and that's that that people are so caught up with the technical aspects of how it's created that they can't possibly imagine the idea of being able to construct a song. I've heard people come close with certain forms of like metal. I shouldn't be so quick to say that, because now that I'm thinking back, I have heard some stuff where the compositional aspects were really interesting, where there were like movements and the dynamics were really, really good.
But I think you're spot on with your point, though. I think you've actually nailed it, though, because these musicians, a lot of them are in their early 20s. And I think they suffer from the fact that they might have come through a schooling system where there wasn't a lot of the discipline that you and I experienced when we went through school, because I'm in my 40s. And I don't know whether they're as willing to take instruction as they are just willing to back themselves. But in backing themselves, they're making mistakes that didn't necessarily need to be put to a recording. And so you bang on about the precision and about it being machine-like, but it lacks some emotion and some spirit. And I think a lot of these guys and girls, man, if they just had somebody like you in their corner going, hang on a sec, what you're doing is great, but let's reframe it this way, or let's put it to a different narrative, they'd probably end up having careers out of it rather than just one or two albums.
Well, now I think we're on to a slightly different topic, because the thing is that when if you put something like that to an artist or a musician who has basically developed a skill set out of based around genre, as opposed to just the need to express oneself, you essentially have to walk them back or forward, depending on where they're coming from, and go and have them re-examine their priorities. Like I think for a lot of people, it really does come down to the fundamental question of why are you doing this? Like, what does this mean to you? What are you trying to say? Have you ever considered this? Now's the time to do so. Does this mean something to you? If so, what? What are you trying to say? What is the fundamental message that you're trying to get out into the world? Because if it's just about look how fast and how precise, with what precision I can play my guitar, no one's going to give a shit. Like, really, you give a shit. Your mom might give a shit. Your friends might give a shit. And maybe 500 other people in the world might at some point in their lives give a shit, but no one else. Unless you can dig down inside and find a fundamental reason for doing this, a sense of intent, a mission statement, even.
Yes.
Something where you kind of recognize and understand and are in touch with the fundamental need that a human being has to express themselves beyond this kind of like egotistical desire to become like the most precise guitarist in Copenhagen, or wherever. It's like, it ain't going to matter to anyone else. It ain't going to make any difference. And ultimately, you're wasting your own time because you'll get tired of this. That's not an ambition. And if so, it's an ambition that may last a couple of years at best. It's boring. What's exciting is going deep inside and finding that expressive core that every human being has, but only a handful are able to use as a medium to be able to speak to other people.
Indeed. All right, I'm going to change gears if that's cool. And look, I'd love to ask you about a number of the albums that you've been involved with over the years. And some of these albums are my personal favourites of all time, so I hope that's cool. And I've picked some interesting ones. And believe me, I've gone through your interviews with Google, and I'm going to avoid any of the typical conversations that people try to have with you, because as a musician, to be honest with you, I generally don't care about a lot of the superfluous stuff. I just want to hear from somebody like yourself who's been up close and personal with musicians, what they were like to work with. So my first one is Ozzy, because you worked on the Osmosis album in 1995, which is one of my favourite Ozzy albums, it must be said.
Oh, wow.
And
cool, thank you.
Look, it's probably also, and this is my words here, of course, this is probably the last album that I think he was actually coherent, because I saw him in 1998 down here in Australia, and he was on top of his game. He was actually pretty good. But I saw him again 10 years later in 2008, and he was singing a full beat behind the rest of the band, and I don't think that was just then. I think he's still doing it. But, okay, you've seen, everybody knows Ozzy, Sharon, there's the social aspect of it, but very little is out there in the public domain about what Ozzy is like in the studio. So can you tell us what he was like as an actual musician? So remove the Prince of Darkness tag, and as a bloke who just has to record his cut, what was he like as a fellow to work with?
Honestly, I don't think that he enjoyed being in the recording studio very much. I think he really preferred being on tour, being on the road. So I think it was kind of laborious for him. But I mean, obviously everyone has their own personal choice about what they want to do. I mean, I have to say that it wasn't always very pleasant working with him, but he is easily one of the funniest people I've ever worked with in my life. He has this uncanny ability to be able to tell a story and then tell it probably the same story 5 times over. I think, obviously probably not remembering that he'd already told it.
Yeah.
But, somehow, even though you know that you're going to get the same punchline or the same resolution to the story, you would somehow find yourself on the floor laughing anyway. He's a fantastic ability to tell stories and make people laugh. Working was difficult. and frankly, it was a very hard record to get made.
Right. Yep.
You know.
There are a lot of musicians that came and went on that album. So, is this the genesis of yourself and Dean Castronovo starting to work together, or is that something that happened a lot earlier?
No, that was it. That was really it.
Right.
That was, that was quite an experience. It was very, very interesting working with Dean. Apart from the fact that he is one of the very best drummers I've ever worked with. When he came in, when I first started working with him, the band were pretty much picked before I got involved, with the exception of Steve Vai, who was there for a little while, and Zach came back in. But yeah, Dean was there. I don't remember quite how he got in, but he was he played a lot. He was very he added a lot. Let's put it that way. Over the course of rehearsing and working with him, we really kind of developed a way of him being able to rein himself in and play more to the song. And I came to see what a fantastic drummer he is, and how quickly he could adapt to any situation. And he is one of those rare guys who can hit a drum so hard because he's really big and strong, but at the same time he knows how to get a really good tone out of it, and that is so hard to do.
Oh yeah, indeed.
Most guys who don't know how to play, they'll just drop a stick right down on the drum head, just leave it there and just choke the drum.
Yep.
He just lift it right back up, and the drum would just go like boo, it would talk.
Oh yeah.
It's wonderful to work with someone like that. Like he was just so great.
Yeah, I remember I first came across him many, many years ago, I think before I heard him on Osmosis, when he was playing with Marty Friedman and Jason Becker on the Cacophony album. And then I think he did the Marty Friedman solo album. And I started seeing his name appear quite a bit through the years after that, and I can understand why. He's just a studio gun. He gets it.
Mm-hmm.
He gets it. And
yeah, he is. He is, and very musical.
There was somebody else that, now here's a rumour that I want to put to rest or otherwise, but I hear James Lomenzo was initially supposed to be the bassist on Osmosis. Is that the case, and were any of his parts recorded?
James who?
James Lomenzo from White Lion, and was in Megadeth subsequently and a few other things.
Maybe. I never heard anything about it if he was.
There you go. Then he wasn't. No, that's... Because I heard him...
No, I was under the impression that it was going to be Geezer. At one point, I think that... I think Bob Daisley came in.
Oh, really?
For a minute.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, he's wonderful, but he didn't really suit the vibe of the record.
Yeah, Bob's Australian as well. I've spoken to him a couple of times. He's from Sydney, and
oh, really?
Yeah. Not a lot of people know that. Yeah, because he spent so much time abroad. But he's a magnificent bassist, and he was the one that Ozzy turned to pretty much through the guts of his career, really, didn't he? Well, I think it's probably fair to say my comments here alone again. But if it wasn't for Bob, I don't know whether Ozzy would have had a career after leaving Black Sabbath.
I don't think. I certainly couldn't argue that. I mean, he co-wrote a lot of stuff with him, and he was definitely a really good foil. He worked really well for Ozzy. Absolutely.
Another album that I think is very, very overlooked. It wasn't so much at the time when it came out, but these days I think people have forgotten that it's around, and that's Mike Ness and Social Distortion's White Light, White Heat, White Trash. Now, I reckon that is one of the best-sounding rock albums out there ever. Okay, that album...
Really?
Yeah, you know why? Because it sounds great in shitty speakers in the car. Okay, when you're 18 or 19, like I was at the time, and you get that album, and you put it on in your Suzuki Swift, I don't know what the equivalent is in the States, but in your Suzuki Swift, like a little small compact car, and you've got an AM radio only and an aftermarket CD player in it, that thing just jumped out of the speakers. There were many nights I remember driving home from work with that album cranked. It's got some serious grit, And, the other thing, though, it sounds like it wouldn't be out of place in a stadium in terms of the sound that you pulled. And I understand you worked with Dean Castronovo on that album as well. But what was it like working?
That's right.
What was it like working with Mike on that one there?
That was another hard record to make, believe it or not. I actually, I remember getting some shit from a couple of people about why it took me so long to make that record in particular. And there was just a specific vision there, and I really wanted it to be a really good representation of Mike as a performer and the band as performers, and the kind of energy that they bring to their shows. And I felt that even though they'd made really good records, they'd never done that. Like, they never really had that kind of electricity on any of their recordings. And I mean, I can't fault any of the other people that who they've worked with. One of whom is Dave Jordan, who I think is absolutely fantastic. It felt to me like they needed something that was a little bit less restrained, because I felt that when Mike would go in to sing, it just felt like, I wouldn't say it felt like he was holding back. I guess that is how it felt, but I know that he wasn't consciously doing that. It was more a sense that, I got a sense that he didn't really feel comfortable in the studio, in the recording studio, as a place to perform. So we spent a very long time doing vocals on that record. Finally, I think we got to a place where he just really started to let loose and open up, and I think it finally clicked with him, and that was a great moment. It was really wonderful to see, to help him get to that place where he could really look at what he did and go like, oh shit. Yeah. There's a recording that reminds me of how I sound when I'm actually, or how I feel when I'm doing a live show.
Yeah. Well, for anybody that listens to this, I reckon that album there is one of the best that you've been on, and that's my personal opinion, of course, but it still just sounds very vital to this day. Some of the songs have dated, I think, a little bit, but the sound, it just, even on bloody MacBook Air speakers, it still jumps out at you. I was listening to it before we connected, or a couple of hours before we connected. When I got up, I put it on because I wanted to be reminded about how I felt when I first heard that album, because I wasn't a fan initially. I didn't know anything about Social Distortion, but I thought that might have been their first album when it came out, actually, how vital it was. And then you sort of go back and realise that he's been around since the early 80s or thereabouts. So, hey, I better do a time check. Are you cool to have to field another couple of questions, or have we got to wrap things up?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Well, Courtney and Hole. So you worked with Courtney on Celebrity Skin and on Nobody's Daughter. Now, let's talk about this album, America's Sweetheart, because I don't know why she overlooked you for that one there. Because she picked Josh Abram, who I know is a fantastic producer in his own right and has done a lot of good things elsewhere, and there were a few other producers that worked on that album from 2004 with her. But I've had a few listens to that album in preparation for our conversation. Now, what she seemed to lack, and this is my take on it, of course, is she seems to lack a critical eye, critical analysis, all of the things we spoke about at the beginning of our conversation on that album. And that's what I think your great strength was and what you brought to Celebrity Skin. Because I'm one of those people that feel as though Celebrity Skin is a significant jump from Live Through This. Okay, and I've got both albums and I've listened to them a lot when they first came out. But that critical analysis is something that you would have given her. So do you know why she overlooked you for the solo album when she ended up working with you on Nobody's Daughter in 2010?
Not really. No. And it's never occurred to me to ask. It's really, it's her choice. I think that she could have benefited from that, although I don't think that she was in a place where it would have mattered. I mean, unfortunately, I think Nobody's Daughter suffered from that as well. And I think that she was in a place in her life where it it wasn't easy to have a conversation like that, which is one of the reasons that I wasn't able to finish the record, because I just felt that we weren't getting anywhere at a certain point, and that it wasn't really going to shape up the way I felt the record with her should have. You know, so we kind of had we had a parting of the ways there.
Yeah.
But from that perspective, I'm incredibly proud of Celebrity Skin. It's one of my favorite projects that I've worked on, and like so many of them, it took a lot of work, but the development that you're talking about also came from the fact that the band really had a specific idea in mind for that record, that it wasn't just me coming along and sort of imprinting something on them. Like, they really wanted a very significant change from the last record. They wanted to make a very, very polished sounding pop record. And that was basically part of the mission statement for them. That was what they wanted going forward, and I had to honor that.
Well, I think Celebrity Skin is going to be. I think it's one of the best rock albums of the '90s. I think there's this temptation for people who weren't around back then. A lot of these journalists at Pitchfork and Vice and all the rest of it, to reframe a lot of albums that came out then through the lens of right now. But back in those days, I thought Live Through This as a very raw album that had potential, but I don't think that it was as fully realised as what it could have been. Now, with Celebrity Skin, I do think that's a fully realised album in that it is polished, and already made the point that it's a progression, but it's an album that sounds great on a variety of speakers, which is so important these days in particular. So 20 years on, the album still sounds relevant in my view. So I hope people give you that feedback.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's always funny because once in a while, not very often, I'll turn on the radio, and it's crazy because that song will come on every so often. I'll be like, oh wow, it actually sounds pretty good.
Is that Malibu that comes on? Because we still hear Malibu in Australia quite a bit.
It's that or Celebrity Skin,
Yep.
and it still pops. I mean, it's still got a good. It still sounds good. It still sounds pretty fresh. And they just had a really good thing going. Like, she and Eric they were very good writing partners, and and she was at the height of her creative powers at that point. She was such a great lyricist. I just used to marvel at the stuff that she would come up with. It was very, very personal, and it packed a lot of wallop. She's like, when she's on, she's really good.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true. When she's focused, when she wasn't that focused when she came down here in 1995, I think it was, but in 1999, when she had Melissa in the band, they were on point. They were a fantastic rock and roll band back then.
Yeah, definitely.
So, mate, I've got one more album artist to ask you about. I really want to thank you, and I appreciate your time here. And for people that don't know out there that are listening, you've worked with Korn, the Chili Peppers, the Cult, the Verve Pipe, Soundgarden. There's that huge album that you worked with them, Super Unknown, from 1994. Black Label Society, the Bronx. There are so many wonderful artists you've worked with, but the last one in particular I want to ask you about is Marilyn Manson on Mechanical Animals. Now, I feel as a musician, that's Manson's high watermark. Okay, so I think, again, the jump from Antichrist Superstar to Mechanical Animals is similar to the jump from Live Through This to Celebrity Skin, in that it's a marked improvement in songwriting and also production. Okay, now I definitely don't think he's done anything as critically successful since that. It might have been more commercially successful albums that he's done, although I'm not even sure about that. But I do feel like...
no.
Well, there you go. Now, I have spoken to some people that have worked with Manson, and they've said, yes, he has his ways, but he's actually very diligent and a very professional recording artist who just wants things done right. And I think sometimes people have misunderstood that. But what was your experience like with him in the studio?
He's definitely a character. I think he could be very, very difficult to deal with at times. Because it's his party and blah 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 blah. But when it came time to record, I can say with a lot of confidence that I don't recall him ever not being as professional as possible, and also not having a very, very good work ethic. He was he worked so hard to get things right. He was he was really on it, and I think that record meant a lot to him because it was really a departure from form in a lot of ways. Like, he was moving away from the more goth aspect of Marilyn Manson. Although to me, it kind of like it's sort of a mutation of like the whole goth thing rather than like a complete departure away. And it was very ambitious, and he took a lot of shit for it as well. Even especially from his record company, believe it or not.
Wow. Okay.
Well, because a lot of the imagery that he was using was very controversial. And I think record companies tend to prefer, if an artist is a known quantity, that they kind of retain that or remain in that familiar space so that they can market them. And when the artist moves away from that, the record company flips out because they don't know what to do. And I saw that happen a little bit with Universal in this case.
Yep.
Although, as I said, the record went on to be, it's definitely his bestseller. But he's very talented. Everyone in his band was and is incredibly talented. I mean, Twiggy is definitely, like, having him in the band was really, really important.
Yes.
And Pogo too. Like they made up. They had this very unique framework that you really couldn't find anywhere else. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I'm very proud of that record also.
Well, you've got a career to be proud of. I want to thank you so much for answering my many questions and sharing so much. You have been listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series and syndicating for the A-List Online. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith, and that was a conversation that featured producer extraordinaire Michael Beinhorn. Thank you so much for listening.